SNESdrunk.
Yes, that's right. Just when you thought there couldn't possibly be any more Super Nintendo PC ports, we've got a doozy here with Utopia, the Creation of a Nation, originally made for DOS, Atari ST, and Amiga, before getting ported to the Super Nintendo in September 1993 by Jaleco. And as you might expect, this is yet another game where you pop it into your console, turn it on, and immediately you're like, okay, what in the hell do I do? You turn to the manual, and it's 60 pages long, chock full of information. It's at this point where some of you may say, to hell with all this, and you go to YouTube to see if anyone can sum it up in one word. Well, that is kind of my job here, although it's going to take a lot more than one word, and hey, it does help that Utopia is a pretty interesting game. It's just kind of awkward, clunky, and slow on the Super Nintendo, as you might expect. For starters, take a look at the menu you're met with. It's similar to Populous with all its weird icons and logos, and the landscape viewing area scrolls the same way. It's always a little wonky to try and navigate through a game like this using the controller D-pad, but Utopia is compatible with the SNES mouse peripheral, which means if you play this any way you can, which you may have to do since the Super Nintendo version was never released anywhere else, then you can use your regular old computer mouse or the laser mouse made by Hyperkin, and it makes Utopia a lot more player-friendly and easier to approach. The object of the game is simpler than you might expect. You play as Commander Burke, who is put in charge of colonizing 10 different planets, and you can do that in any order from this menu here. The problem is that there are other alien races trying to beat you to it, so you gotta wipe out your opposition while building up your own colony. That sounds pretty fun, right? Well, getting to that part takes a minute. First, you gotta understand the menu. The ZZ button there, unfortunately, does not summon ZZ Top, it pauses the game. This thing here is a magnifying glass that brings up intelligence reports so you know how and when to attack your alien counterparts. This globe icon here brings up an ugly and hard-to-read map. And this baseball cap brings up all the different stuff that you can build once you get your economy going, and there is a lot here. Everything from shipyards, tank yards, radar facilities, chemical plants, security centers, life support, even giant sports stadiums to entertain the masses with bread and circuses, I guess. You can see how much each building costs, how long it takes to build, and what their benefit provides. Like for instance, if you pick the first planet, you're going to want to get started with building hospitals and set the birth rate to high, since we're going to need a lot of people to slave away in the missile silos and chemical plants. Next, you'll need to give those people a place to live by providing living quarters, and just like in SimCity, you gotta be careful on where to put those on your map. You can't just stick them right by a factory or nobody's gonna live there. You'll also need security centers so your people don't go insane and loot everything. From there, you build workshops, farms, power stations, no, not that power station, and all sorts of other stuff. What's cool is that you can't just repeat the same formula on every planet, since each setting has different types of terrain you gotta deal with. So while the first planet is pretty easy and open-ended, you'll need to mess around with trial and error a bit just to see what works when you're dealing with deserts, mountains, and other tough alien terrain. Back to the menu, this face icon here brings up your advisors. Starting from the upper left, you got your civil engineer, head of research, colony administrator, financial consultant, senior psychiatrist, and the guy on the lower right who looks like RoboCop wearing a CPAP is your supreme commander, who advises you on military stuff, so long as he's not trying to get some restful sleep. In case you can't tell already, this is a lot of stuff to manage. It's a bit like SimCity in space with way more menus, numbers, and advisors, and I haven't even gotten to the combat yet. Unfortunately, you don't ever see the alien settlements. Instead, you send spies over and they come back with useful information, usually a quote with something like, "Their leader said our streets will flow with the blood of the non-believers." No, it's not that bad. But some alien colonies can be obviously super aggressive, so it's smart to defend yourself with missiles and cannons as your first line of defense, and your planes and tanks as backup. To go on the offensive, just send everything you got at them. Not a lot of nuance here. That all sounds great on paper, but Utopia can be a very slow, plotting, overly detailed, overly granular game. There's so much stuff you have to balance correctly, and a lot of it is trial and error depending on what planet you're trying to colonize. There's a whole bunch of other stuff I haven't even mentioned, like trading, research development, Earth getting in the way with their nonsense, and various other problems. And holy cow, this is one long game. Building everything from scratch on 10 different planets is pretty daunting and takes forever. Thankfully, the dev team realized this and provided a practice mode where you've got no monetary limitations and you can just screw around till you get comfortable with how things operate. So yeah, Utopia Creation of a Nation is such a cool idea for a game. I mean, come on, it's SimCity in space with combat. And it does work to a certain extent, it just doesn't work as well as it should on a home console like the Super Nintendo. The view screen is frustratingly small, the balancing is obtuse and seemingly random, and the combat is a bit of a letdown. There's really not that much to it other than attack with tanks and planes and defend with missiles. If you like games like this, I'd recommend Metal Marines over this. It's a similar game I covered years ago. The combat in that one is sort of like Battleship, which sounds lame, but it works a lot better for an SNES game. If you want to play Utopia today, the PC version is probably the way to go, and if you like it, you can also find its spiritual successors on PC as well, with games like K240 and Fragile Allegiance. But as for Utopia on SNES, I don't know, Jim. I do kind of like it, I guess, but sort of, maybe. Using the mouse certainly helps, and city planning and management can be fun. They just crammed way too much into this game to the point that the balancing suffers, and the combat is a bit of a letdown. It's a clear case of a game that's definitely not for everyone. I'd only check this one out if you're really into SimCity or any of the Koei games I covered recently, just as a curiosity. Alright, that's all for now. I want to thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.